Greetings and welcome to the Midweek Refuel. I'm Pastor John Woodfield of Remnant Church in Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina. And the Midweek Refuel is where we go down into the archives and seek out old and ancient wisdom to help us prepare for tomorrow's spiritual warfare. This week, we find Augustine contemplating whether the contemplative life is conducive to a hedonistic lifestyle. But before we get there, a short section about Augustine's mother seems thrown in at first glance. The first time you look at it, it is just a tidbit of information that seems more emotive than constructive. It doesn't seem to add anything to the narrative at first, but then I started to place it within the context of what is being told in this week's lesson. Augustine is slowly but surely being trained by both the direct hand of God and by the hidden providences of the Father to hear and to understand and obey the still small voice that is sent from the Father. I believe that the still small voice is always willing to engage in conversation with us. The problem with the still small voice is that it will not be rude and it will not override your free will, nor will it continue to remain in healthy communication with a vessel unwilling to have a relationship with it. You can indeed grieve the Holy Spirit. The Bible tells us you can do this. But good news, the still small voice is long-suffering. It is jealous. That's a good thing. It is slow to anger, and it is quick to forgive through the blood of Christ. But listening to it constantly with fidelity and intent to obey seems to be a very, very difficult task for most of us mere humans. Augustine has had the privilege of being raised by a mother who has spent her life becoming attuned to the vibrations of the Holy Spirit's still small voice. She is actually quite an adept at listening because she is instantly aware of when the sarx or the flesh is trying to imitate the voice for selfish reasons and to achieve sarx desires. Of his mother, Augustine writes this, quote, "She did see some empty illusions of the mind, driven to them by the momentum of her human spirit and its agitation over this matter. But she related them to me without the confidence she usually had when you showed her something, instead looking on them with contempt. For she used to say that she could tell, as it were, by the taste, not explicable in words, the difference between your revelations and the imaginings of her own soul," unquote. In the book Dune by Frank Herbert, Paul Atreides is about to put his hand into a literal box of extreme pain and told that if he withdraws his hand for any reason during the experiment, he will instantly be put to death. And he's told that an animal would gnaw its own arm off to escape the pain, no matter what reason you gave to the animal. But the human, the true and high human being, according to Frank Herbert, is the humanoid who has elevated the rational over the instant tribulation or the momentary trial or nightmare of life. The mind should be able to endure momentary pain long enough to sacrifice the better for the best. Christ is the ultimate example of this ethic and this moral. Jesus endured others' pain for them so that the best could be had by all. That is true altruism, and few of us will ever approach that level of perfection. Thank God few of us will ever be asked to exemplify this level of spiritual maturity. Listening to the still small voice requires a sort of death on the listener. I was asked once if I believe that God heard the prayers of unbelievers. Well, of course I do, but I don't think they're listening for a response or willing to obey the commands that will fix their situation, even if God did respond to them. It would be a futile effort on God's part to spend too much time in communication. I believe that the real dialogue begins after the rebirth and the ego death of the cross of Jesus the King. Once that mystery has been breached by the blood of the sacrificial lamb, then and only then does the work of the Spirit and the death of the sarks begin to quiet the sin-broken mind enough to even begin to tune into this still, small voice. The more you listen, the more you hear. The less you listen, the more you slide back towards bestial life. Augustine's mother has walked the path long enough that normal bestial desires have lost their ability to confuse and intimidate and imitate the still small voice. But still, the temptation to allow wishful thinking and personally desired outcomes to act as the Spirit's imposter will always tempt those who love, and especially tempt those who love well. Love can cripple us with trying to do the work of God on our own strength, or worse, trying to strong arm God into a course of action different than the one he has already preordained. This love will many times impersonate the Holy Spirit to a saint who would never once be knocked off course by what we typically think of as sins or gross sins. I have watched many a parent love a child literally to hell. This being said, learning to listen to the Spirit is a spiritual discipline, but it is also a spiritual art. Let me give you some strange advice about listening to the Spirit. Fill yourself with the Bible, but also fill yourself with traits and demeanors of a gentleman or a gentlewoman. Study etiquette. Learn the traditions of the past that were put into place, into society, by people who sought to extend graciousness, love, and courtesy out into the world around them. Restore some of the old traditions to their traditional symbolic meanings, and watch your world begin to light up. Etiquette is for real men. Don't believe me? Ask a woman who has been escorted by a gentleman. Watch an old Bond film and get a little educated. Are you a man who has trouble with confidence? Then become confident at being a gentleman, and the rest will fall into place. Why? Because etiquette is love, and it's love in motion. Love those around you enough to serve everyone you come into contact with, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. Embrace the broken, love the unlovable, defend the truth, even if the object of love bares its teeth at you in hatred for doing so. Love in such a way that it becomes obvious that you would rather be a spectacle than fail at your duty to love. The world is starving for these kind of people. Etiquette is an exercise in saying no to yourself and actively placing your attention on others and their needs instead. So, we learn how great a spiritual giant Augustine's mother is. But what of the son? Well, who would have guessed? Yep, sex. The thinkers and scholars are planning to create a He-Man woman haters club for philosophers. One problem: they suffer from the same disease as the servants, the same disease as the kings, and the same disease as the common citizens. Without the second birth, we are unable to tune into the still small voice long enough to have the proper spiritual warfare at all. We are slaves to desire. When put to the test, these men, one of whom is still considered a genius today, Augustine himself, decided in favor of sex over higher and more noble intellectual and spiritual pursuits. Augustine writes, quote, "But when we began to consider whether this life would be possible if our womenfolk were present, some of us already being married and others, myself included, hoping to be, all our noble plans fell to pieces in our hands and lay utterly shattered on the ground," unquote. This is a strange language, isn't it? It is the native language of lost sinners. Think about the insanity of what was just read. In their opinion, as will become evident when we read the chapter as a whole, the philosophical life not only far surpasses the vulgar hedonism of the flesh, but is also to be considered, quote, cultured retirement. A life of thinking is far better than our animal and fleshly desires. Not only better, but better enough to be pursued and called by philosophers to be the highest pursuit. But there's a problem. They can't do it. The still small voice has spoken, but they only feel it as an impulse to be resisted. That's not right. Resisted is the wrong word. They are bound and chained. They are not free. They aren't resisting anything. They feel free. The fact that they had a choice made them feel as though they exercised a choice. We pull this trick on children all the time, right? Here's your choice instead of just saying, what do you want? They did not have a choice. Anyone with any sense knew that at this point in the narrative, the man Augustine would pick sex. Because it was a choice? No. But rather because it was what the flesh wanted, and the flesh doesn't shut up until it gets what it wants or until it is crucified dead. Augustine can't even wait for his marriage. You'll hear it in the reading. He gets another girl to replace the girl that he got rid of to get married in the first place, to fill in the time between his breakup and walking down the aisle. He says he does this to stay in practice. Listen, he says, quote, "I was impatient of the delay, and being not a lover of marriage, but a slave of lust, I got myself another, and not a wife, so as to maintain my soul's sickness as it was, or if possible, to make it worse, and convey it with an escort of enduring habit into the realm of matrimony. Nor did I find any healing for the wound caused by the severance from my previous partner. But after the inflammation and the grievous pain, gangrene set in. It was as if the wound were numbed, but that it was even more incurably painful." Unquote. As we read, just enjoy the circus to which we are about to listen. Augustine keeps writing about choices, as though he has any choices without first having freedom. All of us know what the right road is. We know what the right road was because the still small voice is telling both Augustine and us the proper route. But all of us also know exactly what Augustine is going to do before he does it, simply because all of us understand sin. Some of us will begin to see this pattern in our own lives and hopefully do the discipline necessary to display freedom in our choices. If the Holy Spirit tells you to walk away from something or to put down some temptation, it is not to deprive you of something. It is to keep you from building up a tolerance to healthy and lovely things. Sin will rob God's gifts from you. They will look like the same gifts, but they will be slightly twisted, and you'll notice. And they will come in abundance, much more abundance than they should. They will come in quantities large enough to kill your taste buds forever. Read of the fates of the world's most notorious hedonists and begin your spiritual education. Let us turn now to Book 6. We're going to be reading from chapters 13 to chapter 16, and this week we're going to wrap up Book 6. You can get a copy of this book anywhere you get your favorite open source literature. Gutenberg Press or whatever it's called online. You can grab it there. If you are interested, the next book that we will be studying is Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. And we still got a good ways to go in this book, so no need to rush getting that. Starting Book 6, Chapter 13. In the meantime, I was under unrelenting pressure to marry. I was already in the process of seeking and being granted espousal to a girl, my mother being especially concerned that once married, I could be washed clean in the saving waters of baptism and rejoicing more each day that I was being made fit for it, and observing that both her prayers and your promises were being fulfilled in my faith. Indeed, in accordance both with my request and her own desire, she besought you daily with great and heartfelt cries that you would show her through a vision something of my future marriage. But you refused. She did see some empty illusions of the mind driven to them by the momentum of her own human spirit and its agitation over this matter, but she related them to me without the confidence she usually had when you showed her something, instead looking on them with contempt. For she used to say that she could tell, as it were, by a taste, not explicable in words, the difference between your revelations and the imaginings of her own soul. Nevertheless, pressure was put on me, and betrothal sought with a girl some 2 years under marriageable age, and as she was pronounced satisfactory, a period of waiting ensued. There were several of us friends who pondered and debated the troubles that vex our human life and regarded them as anathema, to the point where we had all but made firm our resolve to remove ourselves from its troubles and live in cultured retirement. This retirement we had arranged thus: whatever we could procure, we would offer to the general good, and of all our possessions we would make one common property. Through the sincerity of our friendship, there would be no mine and thine, but the common property, contributed by all of us, would belong in full to each of us. Everyone would own everything. There could, we thought, be perhaps 10 of us in one community. Among us, some that were extremely wealthy, most notably Romanius, my fellow townsman and close friend from an early age, who was drawn to court by the great ebb and flow of his business affairs. He was most insistent on this point and had the most authority in putting his case, because the amount of his property far excelled the rest. We had also decided that 2 officers every year should see to all our needs while the others led a quiet life. But when we began to consider whether this life would be possible if our womenfolk were present, some of us already being married, and others, myself included, hoping to be, all our noble plans fell to pieces in our hands and lay utterly shattered on the ground. From then on, we returned to our sighing and groaning, toiling up the wide and well-trodden paths of the world, for many were the cares in our heart, but your counsel abides forever. Of your good counsel, you laughed at our plans and prepared your own, making ready to give us food in due season and to open your hand and fill our soul with blessing. In the meantime, my sins were multiplied. My familiar bedfellow was torn from my side as being an impediment to my marriage, and my heart, to which she had fixed herself, was torn and wounded and left a trail of blood. She returned to Africa, vowing to you that she would never know another man, and leaving behind the natural son she had borne me. But in my misery, I could not even imitate her. A woman, although after 2 years I was to receive in marriage the girl for whom I had made my suit. I was impatient of the delay, and being not a lover of marriage, but a slave of lust, I got myself another, not a wife, so as to maintain my soul's sickness as it was, or, if possible, to make it worse, and convey it with an escort of enduring habit into the realm of matrimony. Nor did I find any healing for the wound caused by the severance from my previous partner, but after the inflammation and the grievous pain, gangrene set in. It was as if the wound were numbed, but that it was even more incurably painful. Praise and glory be to you, O fount of mercies. I became more needing of mercy, and you became nearer. Your right hand was even now present, ready to rescue me from the mire and wash me clean, and I did not know it. I was called back from plunging even more deeply into the whirlpool of carnal pleasures only by the fear of death and your coming judgment, a fear which among all the various opinions I entertained never departed from my heart. As I debated the nature of good and evil with my friend Alypius and Nebridius, I came close in my heart to awarding the palm to Epicurus, except that I believed that there remained to the soul life after death and recompense according to one's deserving, which Epicurus declined to believe. Moreover, I asked, if we were immortal and lived lives of unbroken physical pleasure without fearing any loss of our state, why were we not happy? What else did we seek? I did not know that this too was part of our great unhappiness, since I was so sunk in misery and so blind that I could not contemplate the light of open dealing and beauty that may be freely embraced, which the eye of the flesh cannot see, but which is apparent in our inmost being. Nor in my unhappiness did I consider from what source flowed the sweetness that I derived from discussing even those unlovely matters with my friends, or the fact that I could not be happy without my friends, even according to the perception which in those days I knew in the midst of all my carnal pleasures. These friends I loved freely, and perceived that they in turn freely loved me. What tortuous paths! Woe to my reckless soul, which hoped, if it departed from you, to gain something better. It tossed and turned on its back, its side, its stomach. The bed was hard throughout, and you alone are rest. Behold, you are present, and deliver us from our miserable wanderings, and establish us in your way, consoling us and saying, run, and I will bear you up. I will convey you and bear you up. I remember hearing the story of a man so stricken by love that he began to wonder if he were under a spell. One night, when laying his head on his beloved's bosom, he looked up into her eyes and stated, I am so utterly and totally in love with you that I sometimes wonder if you cast a spell on me. The object of his desire looked down into his eyes and with a mischievous grin replied, oh, yes, my love, many spells and a potion to boot. But don't be mad with me, my darling. Let me ask you this. Are you happy? And if so, would you rather be happy or have free will back? The story leaves you with no response from the man, for the question is really for the reader to figure out on their own. Take into consideration many of the sexual taboos in our day and time, and you will discover an underlying theme of ownership, control, and trust. Even in the most perverse of taboos, this dynamic plays out. Part of us wants to own and dominate. The other part wants to be owned. Our heart's longing is to be known and known completely, loved and loved completely, embraced and embraced completely, and to have someone who feels the same way towards you, so that it is a completely shared abandonment and a completely shared enslaving. The devil perverts this feeling by getting us so ashamed and impatient that we seek it through every single possible means except the path through which the still small voice guides us. To hear the still small voice is to abandon yourself fully to its guidance and trust it with your most precious and intimate of things. To hear the voice is to be owned, but to hear the voice is to also own. Have you ever seen a kid who is given a remote-controlled spaceship as a present and some other phenomenal gift, but the kid is so young that they're more fascinated with the box than with the gift? Well, God is giving us good gifts all the time, but we keep adding to our box collection. We could have the cultured retirement, but instead we spend our inheritance on filth and filthiness and wonder why in the world we're so miserable all the time. We spend a good deal of time eating pig curds before we realize something stinks. But for those who will learn to listen to the still small voice, a world of wonder and a world of satisfaction appears. Listen anew to the words of Christ. Righteous Father, though the world does not know you, I know you, and they know that you have sent me. I have made you known to them and will continue to make you known in order that the love you have for me may be in them and that I myself may be in them. Unquote. Listen to the words of the lovers again. Oh, yes, my love. Many sacrifices and a crucifixion to boot. But don't be mad with me, my child. Let me ask you this. Are you happy? And if so, would you rather be happy or would you rather stay in rebellion? Me, I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of happiness myself. Christ is King. Hail to the King.